Hi, my name is Austin Riley.
And I'm Morgan Green, and you are listening to CJSW Neighborhood 9 FM as a Airwaves.
This program is dedicated
to the education and exploration of disabled life,
giving voice to the life and experience of people with disabilities.
We cover a wide array of issues and disabilities.
We are people who discuss issues we are passionate about
and topics we are interested in.
We show how disability is in the mind of the beholder.
Today we are talking to Keren Tang, who's a representative of Southeast Ward Karhiio, community of Edmonton City Council since 2021. As a councillor, Keren has served on the Accessibility Advisory Committee as a board member of Alberta Municipalities and Climate Caucus. Keren is passionate about participatory engagement, bringing community perspectives to life, and working with diverse communities to build healthier, more connected neighborhoods. Welcome to the show, Keren. Can you tell us about yourself and your role as an Edmonton City Councillor?
Thank you, Austin, and thank you for having me on this show. So my name is Keren, and I am a two-term city councillor in Edmonton. I'm very proud to represent Ward Karhiio, which is situated on the south side of the city. So my background is actually in public health and the social determinants of health. I moved to Edmonton going on now, 14 years, almost 14 years ago to study public health and, worked for several years in policy, in government, and ultimately decided to run for politics because I wanted to have a say at the table. And I was really interested in local issues, and that's why I chose municipal government. I really view the role as a city councillor as a connector and a bridge builder, particularly between communities and people's experiences and connecting them with policies and governments.
Wow, wonderful. What was your inspiration for joining the Accessibility Advisory Committee? Could you share a little bit about the committee with us?
Yes, of course. So City Council has a number of advisory committees to help advise us on issues and policies that we may not really have strong representations on council, don't really have that lived experience, or, from communities that we might not often hear from. And from the very start, when I got elected, I kind of had my eyes set on the Accessibility Advisory Committee. And this is a group of people, all Edmontonians of all walks of life, who has lived experience with disability or caregivers for people with disabilities. And they get together and talk about various city issues, services, programs, infrastructure, and advise city administration and city council on, on approaches. And I've been part of this committee as the council representative since 2021. So this is going into my 5th year. And the reason why I was so interested is because I am not a person with disabilities. It's not a lived experience I have. And in fact, something that I don't really interact with a ton prior to being elected. And so recognizing that there is a whole worldview that I'm not familiar with, I wanted to learn. And so I really was interested in this committee for the learning purpose. And boy, did I learn a lot from everyone at the table in the last 5 years. And, I really appreciate the work they do. And oftentimes they bring recommendations. The committee brings recommendations to council, generally within what city responsible for. But sometimes they might bring us an issue that really affects everyone that city doesn't have a role in because a lot of the supports for people with disabilities happens at other orders of government. And so in that case, city council has a role to listen to that recommendation and figure out how to advocate for those voices.
Can you share a story or an example from your work where accessibility improvements made a real difference in someone's life?
Just in the years that I have been on this committee, various projects come forward to the committee to get feedback on. And one of the things that I think that the Accessibility Advisory Committee has been really involved with is actually a corporate accessibility framework that guides how employees across the city think about accessibility no matter what area they work in and how they deliver a service or build infrastructure and that kind of stuff. It's very extensive, and a framework may feel like something on paper, but I think the impact I'm seeing in decision makers, in city planners, and just in my colleagues, accessibility comes up frequently. It's not just one person's job to talk about it. It's actually embedded in everyone, in every city worker's mind. And that may feel like a small thing, but I think when everybody in the corporation who delivers very diverse services and programs, thinking about accessibility, thinking about users and who we're serving, can have a huge benefit for everybody. Of course, it's something that I think we're constantly trying to improve, but that's something I know the Accessibility Committee has worked really hard on. I'm really proud of where it has become and know that there are also champions within city administration that we can work with to improve accessibility across the board.
What are the biggest barriers people with disabilities in your community face when it comes to housing, transportation, or employment?
On all those fronts, like I said, we talk about accessibility a lot, no matter what topic we're talking about. So, with the Edmonton's affordable housing strategy, people with disability is one of the 13 key demographics that we have identified, and thinking about housing, whether it's built specifically for people with disabilities or incorporating standards into the construction, making sure that a lot of the different housing projects come forward, includes accessible units, etc., are really top of mind because we recognizing housing is a challenge. When it comes to transportation, of course, transit is a really big area. We have DATS, which is essentially transit specifically for people with disabilities. There's a lots of scrutiny, there's lots of recommendation, lots of feedback from community members that we're always working on to improve the DATS program. City also oversees vehicle for hire, so the taxis, the Uber, and several years ago, this committee worked with another committee focused on gender issue, actually helped to advocate for and develop some of the curriculum for the training for the drivers of vehicles for hire to improve transportation. And then, of course, I think in employment, there is underemployment for people with disabilities. And I think specifically visible, and there's a whole lot of people who are invisible disability that we have to think about as well. So those are some of the areas where we're trying to work on and developing policies to improve hiring, for example, improve transportation, and improve housing options for people.
What inspired you to write the advocacy letter? Can you discuss the main point of the advocacy letter with us?
Yes. So this is something I was saying that earlier, some of these support for people with disabilities are not within city responsibility. And when it falls outside, for example, with provincial government, late last year, the Accessibility Advisory Committee recommended that I bring forward a motion to my colleagues to advocate on their behalf. There is a current program at the provincial level to transition people on AISH. I'm trying to think of the acronym, the Assisted Income Support Service, a transition that from AISH to what's called ADAP, the Alberta Disability Assistance Program. And, there has been a lot of conversations, a lot of engagement, and overall, there's a lot of fear and anxiety among community members to transition. And so, just hearing what the rest of the community is saying, Accessibility Advisory Committee encouraged us to advocate on their behalf. And so essentially, the motion directs our mayor to send a letter to the government of Alberta to immediately pause the implementation of these changes and further to take meaningful, accessible consultation with persons with disabilities, advocacy organizations, and community partners. And the third piece is ask for the province to publicly report on the social and economic impacts of these changes prior to moving forward, which is going to happen this summer. So essentially, we're saying, before you roll it out, can we pause and listen, hear out the anxieties and the fears, talk about how you're going to address them, and also show the data that this is going to be a promising program before you roll it out. That's what we're asking for. And since then, we've seen, many municipalities follow suit, and I'm really excited to share some of the progress on these municipalities.
Okay, for our listeners who aren't familiar, what is AISH and what is ADAP? Can you highlight the differences between them?
Yeah, so AISH is, essentially income support for people. Some people may not be working, some people may be working part-time, but essentially needing the income support to pay for housing and food. So it's a really critical source of income for many people. And what the government's looking to do is to transition from that program. And again, because this is not city responsibility, I'm not an expert on Asia ADAP. A lot of it is what I've learned, but essentially transitioning to a program that will have lots of different kinds of requirement, including requirement to be working, to be fully employed, based on community feedback, it will actually mean a tangible reduction in dollars received when this transition happens.
What is the process for individuals who use AISH in transition to ADAP?
So because I'm not an expert, so I'm not familiar with the specific process, but I think, a person will have to work with a support worker, I assume, and then file a lot of paperwork to make some of those transition, maybe approve their eligibility for the program, and make that transition. And based on, I think, government timeline, it's rolling out in July.
Wow, it's coming up quick.
It is coming up quick.
What feedback have you heard from the disability community about the transition from AISH to ADAP?
Yeah, like I mentioned, there's definitely a lot of concerns. People don't know how this program is going to work. For many people, the fear of being fully employed, given the disability they have, is really unsettling. And generally, it's been pretty widespread fear and anxiety about what's going to happen come the summer. And also, of course, losing, a portion of this really important income source for them to have a quality of life. And as I mentioned earlier, so we started this campaign, this advocacy letter in January. And since then, we've seen towns and cities across the province joining this call for change. So we have, Edmonton, but we also have towns like Claresholm and Camrose, bigger cities like Lethbridge, Calgary, Red Deer, Grand Prairie, and just recently Medicine Hat. If you think about all those cities, that accounts for about 68 to 70% of Alberta's population, which is quite significant. So we have these issues, this transition isn't just going to affect Edmontonians, it's going to affect Calgarians, where you are, is going to affect people living in small towns where resources are already very limited. And so I think that anxiety is even greater. And for us, for municipalities, we also know that sometimes, provincial policy changes affect how municipal services are delivered as well. And sometimes at greater cost or greater burden because we have to fill more gaps. And so that's a huge concern for us as well. So when we made the motion back in January, we weren't sure if the government's going to listen, but we wanted to keep this a widespread conversation in the province. And I'm pleased that, we're still talking about it, not pleased that things haven't changed, but glad to see at least that this is top of mind for people, that when we talk about ADAP, people know what it is, they know where their council stands. And I think that's really important. So pretty wide, unanimous, feelings in the community about this transition.
If you're comfortable sharing, did you receive a response to the advocacy letter? And do you think it will lead any changes?
Great question. Actually, a few weeks ago, we did receive a response back from the minister responsible for this file in social services. To me, it was a very disappointing letter because I think it failed to capture the essence of what we're advocating for. It accused Edmonton City Council of, demanding a pause to this really critical transition, providing income support in a different form to Albertans. It talked about Alberta being leading the country in providing financial support to communities of disabilities, and it talked about various options for appeal. If people don't want to transition. And finally, it talks about pretty widespread consultation with the community. Therefore, we consulted, and therefore, this is a go. So for me, it was disappointing to receive a response like that. I'm glad that the minister was able to clarify some content in the letter that I've been told is not well known in the community. It's certainly not part of the public narrative. A number of assertions and statements were misleading, according to people who are really involved in the analysis and advocacy on this effort. And so, the message we receive loud and clear is cities, you need to stay in your lane and not meddle with, provincial issues. And I guess I really challenge that because I think a big part of our role, as I said at the beginning of this interview, is a connector. We connect what communities are saying to governments, to government policies, and the feedback from the community on this particular issue is so loud, we can't ignore it. So we're trying to connect what people are saying to the government who's going to be making the change. And that is our role. That is our lane. We're trying to focus on doing our part and doing what we can on municipal services. But if a policy like this changes, it's going to generate even greater need and demand on municipal services. So we absolutely have a role to play on this issue, playing within our lane. And, is it going to lead to change? I think that's a really good question. I think we'll find out in the coming weeks. But I also think, for the minister, 70% of the population of leaders representing 70% of the population speaking up. And I really think, and we're asking for you to pause, to listen, to present the data, to present the research, and to say this is a good program. And if that is the case, talk to the community. If there's concerns, let's address it. Let's talk about it in a public forum. And if all those things are addressed, sure, move ahead. But all we're asking for is simply ask yourself the question, is this a good step forward?
What can we do to make our world more accessible?
I think there's lots of things we can do at all orders of government in all sectors, public or private. But at the end of the day, I think probably the most important thing an individual can do is to speak up. Just like I've seen with the Accessibility Advisory Committee, with the broader community that that I've met since launch of this advocacy campaign, because I think if you don't speak up, things will move forward without you. And your just one voice may make a difference. It may not, but it could, and I think, but if you don't speak up, there will be zero chance of change happening.
How can our listeners get involved?
Well, definitely feel free to reach out to myself. If you are talking to municipal leaders in your community, you can reach me at keren.tang at edmonton.ca. That's KEREN.TANG at edmonton.ca. Reach out to me on social media. I'm working with Zachary Weeks, a disability advocate who also serves on the Accessibility Advisory Committee here in the city. And we're happy to help connect, provide key messages for your municipal leaders.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
No, but I have to say, I have a lot of gratitude for being involved in my role, but in particular, meeting all kinds of Edmontonians. And I've learned a lot about issues around accessibility, inclusion, and disability over the last 5 years. There's more to learn. And on this piece, I think we need to keep the conversation top of mind, keep the issues top of mind for Albertans because it affects everyone, not just communities of disabilities.
Thank you for coming on our show. It's a pleasure to chat with you.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here and chat about this as well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Accessible Airwaves
On CJSW 9.9 FM.